Hi, good morning. Today's Friday, October 9th. Patrick Peace here. It's a beautiful morning. I hope you're having a great day as the weekend approaches. I'm covering chapter 9 in The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. Each chapter is harder to read than the last. It really gets bogged down. It's like trying to make my way through wet cement here. This chapter is called Battle of the Sexes. Dawkins says that the sexes are defined by a whole syndrome of characteristics. I thought it was defined by chromosomes, X or Y, but he's got his own ideas. He said that sex cells, he likes to call them gametes, I guess, they started off as isogametes in his evolutionary theory. In any event, he says, they started off historically ancient as isogametes, and then just happened to happen that some became larger or smaller, and the smaller became the male cells, and the larger became the female cells. He says it just happened that way. He always likes to use the phrase just happened, or must have, or accidentally, or spontaneously, or something like that. And then he calls the smaller ones as dishonest, and these become the male. And this is a recurring theme in his work, is that the male is put at a lower level than the female. He says they're not really necessary, because one male can impregnate many females, so his view is that the male is kind of inferior. And he says that because the male sex cells are smaller and faster, they're more sneaky, right? They're more unfair, he calls them. They're more dishonest. Which is like, and again he talks about the genes being the only thing that matters. He says they spend half their time in male bodies and half their time in female bodies. The individual does not matter with Dawkins' theories, and that's the problem, right? He has places no value on an individual. It's only about the genes of the whole species that he gives any attention to. It's interesting because in this chapter, he has a footnote to the chapter, because he goes on and on about all kinds of ideas, and he's adding fractional values to the odds of something happening, right? Between sperm and eggs, and whether this might happen or that might happen. But if you look at the footnote on page, I wrote it down here, 303, he has he addresses I'm sorry to say that this statement is wrong when he says it can be shown that really there would be no oscillation, the system would converge to a stable state. So he's talking about if at one time the males are more dominant, or another time the females are more dominant, there's this oscillation that happens, and then it becomes stable. Anyway, I mean, he's got a lot of convoluted ideas, and somebody finally, as an academic, put together a paper it looks like by Schuster and Sigmund, and they said, no, this doesn't work because of this, and he goes through all the details of why he's wrong. And he says, briefly, we can draw two conclusions: that the battle of the sexes has much in common with predation, and that the behaviors of lovers is oscillating like the moon and unpredictable as the weather. And that's the thing, right? He tries to evaluate or describe the choices that people make between males and females as strictly as if they're deciding what's going to be better for their genes. And there's no romance, there's no idea of destiny, there's nothing talking about the individual, how important an individual person's life is. There's none of that. And so he kind of gets put back on his heels by somebody that said, no, you're wrong because of these reasons. And they gave a clear academic response. But then his response to the conclusions of this person that went against his theories in this chapter, he says, of course, people didn't need differential equations to notice this before. To summarize where someone is saying, no, it doesn't work like this, Richard, because of this, this, this. This is how people behave. It's not like you say. And he says, of course, people didn't need differential equations to notice this before. First of all, he's not using differential equations. He's using fractions. It reminded me of the joke by Steve Martin where he says, it's sprocket, not socket. It's like he's making a joke and he's the only one that gets it. It doesn't seem to make any sense in his response to these academics that told him his theories are pretty much out to lunch or inconsequential, because he's constantly using these fractions. Well, if it's 1/8 of this and there's a chance of 1/2 of that happening, and when you're dealing with individuals, you don't discuss the relationships between male and female in terms of odds and chances and all that. That's not how we think as human beings. Anybody can see that, but it's so plain that nobody will mention it. So he's free to go on with his obfuscation and his complicated description of realities to support his view that all that matters are the genes, and individual social behavior has got nothing to do. Well, it does have something to do with it, but nothing to do with it from what we would traditionally say. People fall in love, they find mutual attraction, they're attracted to each other because of, all the romantic reasons of what they like in another person based on this, that, and looks and that and other things. And he tries to make it a cold, unfeeling propagation of the species idea. Well, if this is 1/8 of the chance of that happening and 1/5 of this, these genes are going to be stronger and that. It's just very, very hard to read. I couldn't even glean very good notes out of it at all. So chapter 9, long, boring, unnecessary, proven to be wrong by other academics, and then he summarizes without providing a rebuttal. I mean, it's 30 years old. I got to give the guy a break that it hasn't been debunked sooner. But in any event, I'm glad to finally be getting through this now, moving on to chapter 10. Because if I do move on to any of his other work, I'm really itching to get my hands on the God Delusion. And from the style of his writing, I'm sure that if he has written other work, he'll be referring back to this a lot. Oh, and that's how I explained it in The Selfish Gene on pages such that you can go back and say, this way I'm not going to fall for that trick. I'll be well prepared ahead of time so that if I do move on to the God Delusion, I'll be able to examine it in light of his previous work. That's my main purpose of going through this. I know it's a very old book, and it's no longer relevant to, in my opinion, it's no longer relevant to common sense, that people would accept the way that people behave in our society today. It's a very weak theory, the idea of a selfish gene. Enough said. Painful to get through this book. I'm not looking forward to having to get through the last 3 chapters, but I will anyway. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. God bless you. Bye-bye now.